Sabrina. I would just add that when the written order is released by the FCC in another week or so, that um, Sabrina will probably be sending a summary, highlighting those points because the orders can sometimes differ, and the devil is in the details. And so we'll be sending that along um, once once we have access to the order. The other thing I would say on behalf of UEN, thanks to everyone who chimed in on the rural-urban issue. I think all the voices were heard, and I think Utah led the way, and that is why we saw this change in the petition for reconsideration, and the FCC changed the urban cluster designation back to the rural. So thank you all very much for your support on that. That's all I've got.
Thank you. And I would definitely echo, that sentiment that, we saw a lot of our Broadband Advisory Council members step up. I know that we reached out to all the associations of governments that were involved in the regional planning effort, and that they agreed to sign on with UEN as co-petitioners. I know that URTA also sent in comments, and we did a letter of support of the comments that they sent in. And I know I was back in D.C. For a meeting that the FCC was in a few months ago, and it came up, and we pressed them again. And so I think just having multiple voices address this issue, and I think that definitely Utah had its voice heard, and I think that that's a really exciting development to come out of this group and to have kind of a united front on something like this that's going to impact funding for education in the future. And like you said, the devil's in the details, so we'll see what the actual order looks like. But we'll make sure to do a summary and send it out to, we'll send it out on our website, and then we'll send it out in our newsletter so that everybody can kind of see a more detailed explanation. And then if there's a need to go into more detail, we can do that at the next meeting. And then also just echo Dennis's sentiment that we really appreciated the Go Shoot tribe working with UEN to apply for that grant. I think that probably helped them to get that funding. Anytime that you can have tribes participating with you, not only is that a good thing, the level of cooperation between tribal entities and other entities, that doesn't always happen. And so the more that we can see that happen on a state level, we definitely appreciate their cooperation with it. And we're super excited that they're going to have some new equipment. We're excited to see what classes are offered on the reservation, and so that's great news. So yeah, good news from UEN. So the next thing that we want to cover, Chief Burbank he's going to be here a little bit later. So we're just kind of go ahead with the agenda, and he was actually a little bit on the agenda. So let's next go to Deb Meyer with USDA to talk about the programmatic environmental assessment for the RUS telecommunications program.
Well, thank you. I'm here to kind of bring to the attention, there was a NOFA, or a notice of comment, that went out on November 28th under the RUS telecommunications, requesting all stakeholders to input their comments regarding the environmental process of USDA on telecommunications. They're looking to rewrite and make new procedures on the environmental process. I think each one of them is different. Like Farm Bill has a different environmental, the loan program, the grant program. What they want to do is they want to encompass it all into one regulation. But they want input, especially from stakeholders, public entities, federal, and providers. So they've listed several questions that they'd like to be addressed, along with those that maybe you have questions on or you've run across that they can address. I think they're trying to coordinate with BLM, with Forest Service, with SITLA, with everyone to try to see if we can come up with one environmental. Kelly will post the website that you can go to make comments on the blog, but I've also included the actual Federal Register in the back with copies. They have phone numbers there if you need to, need to contact someone in national office for questions. And note that they will post all comments for viewing. So not only your comment, but any personal, whatever you put out there will be posted publicly. Just so you know.
Yeah, a really quick question. Do you, I think it might be useful to have the existing policies for those programs just available so that people can kind of look at what's already there. That might help give some more substantial comments.
Yeah, I can get a hold of our GFR, our field representative, Randy, was here last week. I said, well, I couldn't be here this week, so we could address this. He would have, I can send them to you maybe, or they can have a website.
Yeah, we did a blog post, but we can update it and we can put those documents so that they have a starting place to look at.
It looks like they have one that goes with the loan program, if the money is involved with Farm Bill, if the money has Community Connect grants, so I can send a website to you on that. Also, you have until January 27th for comments, so that'll be the closing date, January 27th. Any comments that you would like to make, or suggestions, or like I say, they have a list of questions in here to consider.
So the Forest Service is part of USDA, right?
Correct.
So I'm curious about why your environmental procedures aren't being considered alongside of Forest Service, or vice versa.
Forest Service has control over the land, and we don't. So our environmental is basically under the NEPA and the SHPO requirements. Forest Service gets really involved in whether or not they can sell the land, trade the land, and whatever else they need to do with the land. Since they manage it, we don't manage it. So I think that's why they're trying to, and a lot of our other programs are trying to get with federal and state entities to try to come up with an agreed upon environmental, so that we're just, anyone can accept it. And I think that's what they're trying to come up with. As Forest Service involved over here, Rocky involved over here, and so they just kind of went their separate ways, and I think they're trying to bring everything back to one, because they know it gets time consuming and costly to do an environment over here, an environment, but if we can get one standard that everybody agrees upon, that's what we're striving for.
There was just a comment from you, Ian. I don't know if this is any way to add to the comments that are here, but about 3 years ago, UEN contracted with Beehive Telephone for a project down to Lake Powell School in Bullfrog. And the process was that there's about a 2 miles down to the school that required trenching and boring to install fiber. The actual process to get a permit for that took almost 2 years. And so I don't know if there's a way to...
Under the permitting? Who was it?
The U.S. Forest Service. And so our comments would be, I don't know if there's a way to... The school was in desperate need, obviously, for those upgrades. They were recently completed, but it was a long, long process. And if there's any way to speed those processes up, I don't know.
Any other questions? Okay, any other questions? Okay. Okay. Thanks, Brock.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We deal a lot with BLM on the water side, and
Yeah. Okay, well, and we know that those are definitely issues, and anytime that any opportunity comes up to comment on the environmental process, especially the speed of the process, we definitely encourage our stakeholders to have their voices heard and
The questions on there.
answer the questions that are on the list, and the more that we can get, you know.
On permitting, there is a question on there
Okay.
on permitting, I think. Yes. For projects requiring the use of federal land, what are the biggest challenges in obtaining necessary land use and permitting?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Great.
I think that's why Kelly asked you to come and talk about this.
Yes, we encourage our stakeholders to comment. So.
And 27th of January.
Yes, so 27th of January is the deadline, and so we have a little bit of time to get organized, and we will post information as soon as possible. We do already have, like I said, a blog post, but we could add the questions particularly.
Yeah, I think in the Federal Register, the questions are on there. So,
okay.
Yeah, most definitely, and I will get the environmental process. If there's a check sheet I can get from Randy.
Okay. That's great. Okay, so we are waiting for Chief Burbank to arrive, but in the meantime, we wanted to do a project update. John? Yes. I was thinking we might wait till Chief Burbank got here, and then we could introduce ourselves, and then he could give his presentation. So that's kind of the thought. Okay, so I wanted to give you a quick update on the project. So as you know, we're currently under a federal grant, and that is coming to a close very quickly. We had submitted a request to go into the governor's budget, and we didn't make it into the governor's budget, unfortunately. And so we wanted to kind of just talk to our advisory council about what that means, and just talk quickly about, I guess just what that means. So as executive branch employees, when you have something that goes forward in the governor's budget, really the benefit to doing that, it still has to go through a legislative process, but the benefit of being in the budget, obviously, is that it gives you a lot more ability to publicly advocate for the program. And so we're limited, on that end of things. We did do a presentation to the Public Utilities Interim Committee in November about the program, and we feel it was very well received. We had some legislators give us some very nice feedback about wanting our efforts to continue, and so there is still a chance that a legislator could pick something up during the session and try and secure funding going forward. And so hopefully, we'll see if that happens. And we also, just to let you know where we stand, we will still be operating the program through the legislative session. So we'll still be in place. So we're going to see if anything happens. And we are allowed, if a legislator does have interest, we are allowed to work with them and respond to, requests for information from them. And then, just out to the advisory council, feel free if there are things that you think should continue, feel free to speak with your legislators about the possibility of that. I think that it does put us in a position where, private industry can kind of look at this and say, are there things that are valuable and are there things that we think should continue? And I think it'll give, the private partners definitely a chance to have their voices heard on what they would like to see happen in the future. Chief Burbank, come on in, have a seat. And I don't know if anybody has any questions or any thoughts or suggestions or feedback on that, but that's kind of where we're at. So we're kind of at a tenuous position, but that still doesn't mean that something may not happen, but we're kind of just going to see what happens through the legislative session. And like we said, we've had a few legislators that have been really positive, but we'll see if that takes hold at all. So, are there any? One particular sponsor you'd recommend to contact? Well, I know that, so we presented to Public Utilities. I know Senator Hinkins was very nice and said that he would like to see things continue. Public Utilities, I think, has been the committee that the project has given regular updates to. I know Tara did a few updates. So they are kind of aware of us, what we do. So that committee is obviously a great resource. And we will keep you, if we feel like there's something in the works, and if somebody approaches us and we feel like we need to kind of bring the council together to meet with a legislator, we'll definitely schedule a meeting with our partners so that they can kind of meet with that person. And but like we said, respond to anything that is helpful that maybe something. What was the feedback from the governor's office? I think that the sentiment this year, I don't think it was necessarily anything against this person in particular. I think that a lot of emphasis went to education this year. I think that they were looking for funding to go to education, and I think pulling it from wherever. So, yeah, I mean, Lynn knows that there was money that went from transportation. They wanted to really put a lot of money into education, and so you'll see that reflected in the governor's budget, obviously, and that's an important priority as well. But yeah, so either way, this would have had to go through a legislative process, and so we'll see what happens through the session, and things can change at any moment. So we're just going to kind of ride it out and see what happens. So.
Kelly, do you have any idea on the budget request you made, and if you can share that with the group?
Well, we did mention it in Public Utilities, so I think that it's okay to kind of share that because it's already kind of a public record. So currently, our operating budget, we were given a $5 million grant back in 2010. So that's approximately about $1 million a year. There's a little bit more with the state match. And what we requested was about half of that on a yearly basis. So that would have, we kind of looked and said, what would it take if we wanted to do some additional mapping efforts, continue, the residential mapping efforts, and then also have staff support on the planning side. One of the things that we brought up to the legislative committee was that there are other states, some of our neighboring states have also gone after funding. Colorado has gotten funding to continue their program. I know that New Mexico is trying for funding, Nevada is trying for funding. Arizona is kind of doing a little bit of patchwork where they have an employee that's funded and then they're using some other resources. I think they're actually pulling some money from their education to fund their program. And so we're seeing surrounding states. What's interesting is that the other states also came up with a very similar figure as far as the number, almost exactly the same across the board, about $500,000 to do some mapping and then some planning. So that's kind of where we were at with that. And like I said, we're going to be, respectful that then, if we are approached, we are allowed to work with the legislator, obviously. So, any other questions?
What happens to the state broadband plan if you don't continue?
So, if it doesn't continue, then just everything stops. So it's kind of a hard stop. So it's kind of an all or nothing at this point. So, yeah. So the end of March, we have funding until the end of March. So that gets us through the legislative session. And we've had, our executive director's been great. Our partners have been really great. So
your funding wasn't part of GOED's budget? Right?
No, it was never part of GOED's budget. So that's kind of, it's always been 100% federally funded, and then the state match has come mostly out of 911 funds, and so a lot of the mapping layers that we've used, that's contributed to the state match. A lot of the data, not the broadband data itself, but the supporting data has come from matching for the state. So.
Hey, Kelly.
Yes.
I would also add.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah.
I would also add that, the portion of the funding that was used from the 911 fund for mapping really helped increase
the capacity that public safety has been able to get out of the data that was already in place. So, even though the program and the mapping goals were really to, increase broadband expansion and capacity across the state, I think that there have been a lot of other programs that have really benefited from the broadband grant and the work that was done, including public safety.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so with that, we are going to go on to our next presentation, which is Chief Burbank, who I have never met you, but it's so nice to meet. And actually, really quickly, we haven't done our introductions yet, and I think it would be great for you to see which partners are in the room. I would appreciate it. And yeah, and we're very excited to have somebody on the FirstNet board with us, the National FirstNet board from Utah. So we're very, very excited to have you. So let's do really quick introductions around the room. Let's start with Dennis. We'll go around here, and then we'll go to the back. So we don't have to pass it.
Dennis Sampson, the Utah Education and Telehealth Network.
It really helps when you're on the phone, if you can hear what's going on. Shirley Silversmith, Utah Division of Indian Affairs.
Shari Chambers with Zayo Fiber Provider.
Donna Jones-Morris with Utah State Library Division.
Tara Tui with AT&T.
Whitney Reed with AT&T.
Jason Morgan with Integra Business.
Michael Merrill with the Salt Lake Chamber.
Drew Clark, Curtin McConkey, and also former director of the of the Illinois Broadband Program.
Oh, wait. Former director of the Utah Broadband Program.
There you go.
Bill Duncan with the Utah Division of Public Utilities.
John Harvey, Utah Public Service Commission.
Deborah Meyer with USDA Rural Development.
Lindsay Clark with EDC Utah.
Lynn Yoakum with Utah Department of Transportation.
Jesse Peschman with the Utah Broadband Project. I am the mapping coordinator.
Brereton, the Utah Education and Telehealth Network.
Ryan Marriott with Americom Technology.
Steve Taylor with All West Communications.
Michael Lane, Sprint.
Darren Allgaier, Direct Communications, Eagle Mountain.
Lynn Beecher, Skywire Fiber.
Denise Villa, Level 3.
Brock Johansson with Emory Telecom.
Okay, so with that, we'll have Chief Burbank come up.
Sabrina Scott, Utah Education and Telehealth Network, disembodied
voice.
voice.
We need phone introductions really quick. Sorry, I always forget the people on the phone.
And I'll just add a comment here, just listening to all the introductions, it'd be a shame to lose this platform for networking and collaboration amongst all the varied people in attendance today.
Thank you.
Sarah Digis Broadband.
Eric Isom, CenturyLink.
Jacob Barlow, CenturyLink.
I think, did we have Dave Ryan on the phone? I know he's been knowing quietly listening. Okay, all right.
Perfect, thank you very much. I didn't know for sure how basic or where to start at. So what I'd like to do is kind of just get a flavor or a feeling for what you know about FirstNet. We can start right at the beginning, or we can kind of pick up where we are now. And so if... Okay, I assumed you would be, because there's a lot of people in here who probably know a lot more about this than I do.
It'd be great if you could give an update, and you probably will, on the meeting last week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are in the process. One of the things, I've been on the board for just a few months now, and my first meeting in the end of the summer, they actually issued an RFI for information from the FirstNet board, seeking input on a couple fairly basic things. But what does the network look like? Who are the players? They had a definition of what who's going to access the network, and it was a very broad definition that came out. And so when you take public safety, which has always been the focus certainly of police and fire throughout the nation, and going back to the original let's secure the D block, this now has a very broad application, or potentially broad application, that would include anyone on a homeland security chart or graph. So it takes into public utilities and several other things that would have access to the network. One of the big things for public safety always has been and will continue to be is the ability for priority on the system, whatever the system will look like in the future, preemption capability in the event that you do have an emergency, that you would be able to kick off non-priority users off the system, and so you wouldn't lose that. And then obviously sustainability, because we don't want to lose the network. Now, as you start to look at this, I mean, one of the raging debates that goes on right now is will we do land mobile radio over this network? And the network certainly has that capability and has been tested in some areas, and so it has that capability, but it is not the intention in the first go-round to say, yes, we're going to replace all the police radios that everyone is carrying, police and fire radios throughout the nation. But the nice thing is, and the difficulty is, that the cost associated with it if we're actually going all in with this network. I mean, it certainly has the capability to do that at some point in the future. But again, especially for law enforcement in this respect, they get a little leery as we start to talk about that and say, okay, we're going to change the radio network. I mean, we're not good with change in law enforcement. So that is one of the things that certainly the system has the potential for. So we issued an RFI, and we are actually in the process of issuing another one very shortly after the first of the year, in order to actually progress this a little bit quicker than it has been. The board, I won't say stalled, but there was certainly a lapse in time and a lot of people, especially vendors throughout the nation, started to question, right, are we going to be able to accomplish this? So the meeting that we held in Salt Lake, and it was one that, my first board meeting in Washington, D.C., I said, I'd much rather have them come to Salt Lake and see what's going on. So the board is in the process right now of doing state, right, meeting with every single state and determining and starting to talk a little bit about the opt-in, opt-out, which is, again, a big debate going out throughout the nation as to whether or not a state would be able to opt out and what it looks like. The way the legislation is being interpreted right now is that a state certainly has the ability to opt out, but they would be required then to connect to the network in some way, shape, or form. And what that looks like is still yet to be determined, and who would bear all the cost and access to systems and everything else. But interpretation at this point is, yes, there is an opt-out option, but the state would then, part of the plan would be, how are you going to connect? And if that plan does not meet the needs or the design that is set up through this process, then in essence, a state could be forced to opt in. So that is, I mean, there's a lot of talk and dialogue going back and forth depending where you are. I think the thing that is very important to this room and also very important to me is the fact that Utah is one of the leaders in the nation as far as being prepared to undertake this. Utah is one, I think they've done 7 now, maybe 8 state consultations, and Utah was one of the original 6 or 7 that were done. And so that set us up in a very nice way in order to potentially lead out on this. There's been some discussion about maybe a test or evaluation site or a first go, and we are certainly positioned in that arena to say, yes, we're kind of ready to undertake this project. So it is, I'm very encouraged about where the state sits and as well for the impact on the city. We have, as far as the FirstNet board goes, there was an audit done that was just recently released that said there needed to be some changes as far as the structure and some of those other things. I think we've addressed all those. And the nice thing is that I'm coming in after the fact, but that certainly will cause some concern in the future. I mean, how are they managing this and who's in charge, sort of thing. But again, that audit, I won't go into great detail. It's certainly available. But I think we've overcome most of the challenges and things that were pointed out in that audit. Let's see. Let me open it up right now to questions, and then I will come back and see. I'd hate to just ramble on and not answer any questions. So questions about FirstNet and where we're going and what we're doing at this point.
What do you think the best way? I mean, we would love to see this initiative help expand, the footprint of public safety, even into rural areas. We really would like to kind of see this benefit us as a state. What advice would you give us as a state so that we get the most out of this funding that we possibly can?
So I think the thing that is most important right now, and the challenge that we face as far as a state is concerned and public safety, is very few people in the rural areas throughout the United States, but especially here in Utah, actually understand the capacity of the network and what we'll do. And so you have people, especially in the police chief realm, who are very resistant to go away from some of these things and to be dictated whether by the state, by the federal government, or anyone else. And so that is a little bit of the challenge, is an education process to have people say, yes, I'm willing to participate, and this is what it will look like for us. Obviously, throughout the nation, as you look and you consider where is this going, there's a fee associated with using this. And so it is short-sighted to think that the government, the federal government, will come in the amount of money, whether we lease space on the network or sale of the network or anything else, that we would pay for this in perpetuity. So there will be a fee associated with it. And so I've always said, well, as an end user, right, if that fee is less than what I'm paying now, then I'm happy with that, right? And we can move in that direction. If we're not planning on it being less than that, you're going to have a lot of resistance throughout the nation. And so I think the big thing that we can do is educate and start to prepare and say, yes, this is what we want to accomplish with the network. Who are the users? Again, the three areas as far as priority and preemption and sustainability are crucial. The other thing that I think is very important as we start to look at the opt-in, opt-out is how does that, the way it's being interpreted now is you can only, as a state, if you were to opt out, can only provide service or coverage to your state. You could not extend beyond your borders. But as you look at the population centers, and certainly when you talk about cell towers and some of those other things that may drive this issue in the long run, if you have neighboring states that are opt-in, it's much easier to connect because the cell phone, the way the coverage would work is you would hit some of those other towers. If there's a bright line in the sand somewhere, potentially we would have to have a more robust system in those areas because we would not be able to connect outside the state to it. So that is, again, outside my area of expertise, absolutely, but that is the concern that I think we need to be educated on and certainly work together as a state to see how this is going to play out. The other thing that is very difficult, and I've had a lot of involvement from a law enforcement realm in this for the last few years, even prior to becoming a member of the board, and the idea of being able to participate on a nationwide network that will not shut you out is very scary for law enforcement especially, but public safety in general. And I think many of the service providers in the room who are much more familiar with the capability of the system and what it can accomplish, there needs to be some dialogue back and forth so that we start to get complete buy-in. This is where we're going to be in the future. This is what it is capable of. And also, I mean, the thing that is, again, difficult, I can certainly point fingers at police chiefs. There's lots of ego in that area. We cannot control this. We need to control it to a certain extent, but we can't control it like we do most law enforcement because it is just unrealistic to think that we are going to completely duplicate a network that already exists. Right? We need to look at how do we combine what is existing, add to it, and reach some of the areas potentially that we haven't been able to in the past. But you have unrealistic expectation throughout the nation that all of a sudden this is going to reach into wilderness area because we might need it on one weekend in the next 25 years. Well, we don't have anything that reaches in there right now. And so, again, realistic expectation, what it is going to look like for all the end users, and then also the notion and idea of cooperation, I think, are the areas that we want to focus on and set ourselves up for. And again, I think Utah is positioned very nicely in this arena, and we certainly presented well at the state consultation.
Please. So, could you just give a little more detail on what Utah Access was presented at last week's meeting? Was there much of any discussion about Utah's role? By that, I'm also wondering, is there serious consideration that Utah might try to opt out at FirstNet?
No. So I have not heard any talk in this state. And again, I mean, the state's very large, and I don't know who's rambling about what. But I have not heard any talk at this point that Utah is one of those states considering an opt-out option. All right? I think you are looking at other areas, mostly the very large urban areas, New York City. I mean, there's some debate going on. I think, again, Utah's positioned very nicely. The meeting that we held here locally was not focused, this particular meeting, the FirstNet board meeting, not on the state of Utah. And so there was not a lot of discussion specific to the state other than that we did have our consultation, we participated in that, and we showed very well. But it was not specifically focused on that. But I haven't heard anything, and nor, as an advisor to the state as well as on the FirstNet board, I wouldn't say that that would be the best option for Utah. But again, economically, we have to see what this looks like in the future. But I certainly think at this point we are headed in the direction of participating with the network.
I mean, this is not like a Medicaid expansion decision where there's a huge cost, there's potentially huge costs associated with it. There's not a lot of negatives on the legislative side that I'm aware of for states, staying part of FirstNet.
No, I agree with you completely. I think what the discussion is, and to be very candid, and this is my inexperienced opinion, I will tell you, because I'm certainly not in the telecommunications business. But I think what you see in large urban areas, you see the potential that if we run a network, we can make money as a state or a large city off the network that we would establish. And that is the raging debate right now as far as does the law or the interpretation of the law allow for that. And I think that's where you get some of these states that think they might opt out, because if we build our own network, because there will be funding available through that if it's an opt-out option, and it would be in essence a granting process, would we have the capability to then sell off our excess network to individual service providers, to other entities? And so that is, I think that's where people see the option. Again, I haven't heard a lot of that discussion here in Utah locally, and I personally think it's a better option for us to participate and see what we can do as part of the network. Please.
I know with FirstNet there is a portion in there that addresses tribal nations. And I wondered what the current implications are for the tribes here in our state and their involvement. And I know that the tribes have been very concerned about, access and having emergency response even in their areas be addressed in a timely fashion, and also working with their law enforcement, because some of our tribes have the BIA law enforcement, and they would like to be included in what the state is, going to do with FirstNet as far as being a part of that access and that. Do you know what the current plan is?
So specifically, there's not a current plan as far as the FirstNet board from a national perspective is, because it is falling to each individual state to say whatever is within our state, what we deem as a priority to provide coverage to an area, then that's up to the state to say this is where we want to provide coverage. So the participation, and I know there has been some participation at a state level from tribal entities of how to connect everybody. I mean, the idea that I've always seen, and again, this dates back several years, from the state of Utah is the fact that we want to include all public safety entities that fall under this very broad umbrella to make sure that we get coverage to everybody that we need to. And so absolutely inclusion is part of that, but it's not. That's the other notion that is a little bit of a challenge as far as when you look at from a state to a national level, because really FirstNet is not coming into a state and dictating this is where you need to have coverage. What FirstNet is saying is this is what we can provide. This is the connectivity to the network that you need to have. But state, you define what that looks like within your state, right, and where that coverage is. And again, priority of how the network is developed. Unrealistic to think that, tomorrow or 2 years from now, you're going to have a network in place completely across the nation that's going to cover everybody. So there will have to be a build-out and how we address that. And so the FirstNet board is not considering that. That is up to the state and why the consultations are taking place at the state level.
Chief Burbank, I wondered if you were at liberty to share what was discussed on November 6th at the state consultation meeting.
We've got somebody on the line. I couldn't hear the question. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. If you could repeat it.
I just wondered if you were at liberty to share what was discussed on November 6th at the state consultation meeting.
I'm certainly at liberty to discuss it. I did not attend the entire meeting that day. I spoke for a brief time at that, and I had representatives from the police department who participated and represented me at that meeting. That was an opportunity, and so basically what was presented at the state meeting from a FirstNet perspective is here is what our expectation is for a nationwide network. The state of Utah, have some conversation back and forth and dialogue to decide how are you going to connect, and it was more of an information sharing. Steve Proctor is our representative on that as a state spokesperson, and would probably be better to speak to exactly what came out of that meeting. But from what was relayed back to me from my people from a Salt Lake City perspective is the fact that the state is positioned very nicely to do this. There are certainly some challenges. I think there was some discussion about how are we going to connect everybody? Is it going to reach the rural areas? How are we going to ensure that it reaches into some of those areas where coverage is lacking as far as the public safety, up some of our canyons and those other things. So I think there was some very good discussion that took place, but I certainly did not attend the whole meeting and wouldn't be able to speak directly to everything that was discussed.
Yes. Building a network jumping throughout the whole country is going to be a big challenge. But I think we need to do the state, get the state done. This group here could help tremendously and show what could be done with that type of system. I mean, from St. George to Salt Lake, Logan, and there's going to be in-depth details that will come about as you develop. And I just think it's pretty critical that maybe for the state of Utah, we jump in and do our own first and show what the value might be so that the federal government can see what all it's capable of doing.
So I don't disagree with you. What the state plan, right, will have to demonstrate this is how we're going to connect to the nationwide network. So I'm wearing two hats here, and I don't think that's any surprise to you. And so FirstNet is not going to dictate what your state looks like, but when you the opportunity, though, that funding will be made available to the state in order to do exactly what you described, right? If we jump that funding, then we bear the entire cost, and in essence, we would be falling into that opt-out category. So we're bound a little bit, and this is one of the challenges that I had locally. With our new building, we were actually looking at doing a waiver with the FCC and doing a network for Salt Lake City to address public safety in Salt Lake City, as well as our parking meters and everything else. And then right about that same time that we were developing all the plans for this and, in fact, having the attorneys draft waivers and everything for the FCC, the FirstNet board was formed and all the waivers, in essence, went away and there was a new process developed, and so we've been pushed back a little on this. And so I think it would be a little premature for us to say we're going to build our own network and then see what funding comes from FirstNet. And so we're kind of in that wait and see period, but again, we are developing our plan as to what the state would look like.
What happens, if I was reading FirstNet correctly, if you opt in with FirstNet, your network that you used to do the connectivity becomes property of FirstNet? How are they doing that division of property with current state assets as opposed to it goes to FirstNet? On an opt-in, my understanding was that the assets had to be given over to FirstNet.
So that is one of the definitions that they're looking for in the RFIs and the state interaction that's taking place. It is not the intent of FirstNet to necessarily come in and seize assets in a state or municipality. But what is trying to be defined by the RFIs is how are we going to share those assets? Because if you look and say, all right, here's the network, it needs to be connected to somehow, you would absolutely want to utilize those assets already in place because it would be economically better for you to say, okay, well, we've got this tower, and this tower, and this is how we can connect and do everything straight. And so how are we going to share those is what needs to be defined. And so as far as it becoming property of FirstNet, I don't think that has actually been completely fleshed out as far as what the legislation is. Part of the dialogue that's taking place right now in the RFIs is to define exactly what some of the terms in the legislation mean and what it's going to look like at this point. And so I don't know that that's been completely identified, and in fact that's been an issue that we've discussed as a board.
Chief Burbank, I was going to comment. It sounded like in the board meeting
to
that
the private sector and encourage, coordination. There's obviously a lot of companies that already have assets that could be utilized in kind of a public-private partnership. Have you talked about, how you would kind of work with existing infrastructure to maybe do something at a lower cost using existing facilities and create kind of a cooperative model for the state?
That is exactly where the board is right now, because it is unrealistic to think that the allocated spectrum is going to generate enough revenue in order to build out a nationwide network that's going to provide the coverage, as well as when you have a network that already exists with several carriers throughout the nation. What will be interesting as this goes forward is how those carriers either come together, don't come together, in order to say this is what the proposal is. And so that's partly what is being looked at by the FirstNet board. I have a tremendous amount of confidence in this after sitting on the board. There's only 4 public safety representatives. I'm one of 4 in the nation, and the rest represent private industry, in essence, and a few federal government folks, but that have a lot more knowledge about what the capability of a network is. And so that's really where the focus is right now. And it's the question of the future, right? Is this going to be a grant given to a large service provider that is now going to provide this interconnectivity for us and the priority and everything that exists? Or is it going to be more of a build out and then add to? That remains to be seen exactly what that's going to look like, and that hopefully will be in the next year as far as RFI going out again, they're starting to look at some of these things a little more closely to see what possibilities exist.
Do you look at the state, if you do opt in and you do the federal, then later when you start bringing things down to what we see, do you look at the state like maybe St. George, a key city right on I-15? Some of the other key cities in the state that you look at for your program, or has that been thought of yet?
That would not be a national decision or a FirstNet decision. That would be a state decision. And so there is a lot being pushed to each individual state to say, you design what you want the network to look like in Utah or wherever you may live and reside, and then just tell us how you're going to connect. So even in the notion of an opt-in, it will be up to the state to determine this is what the network's going to look like in the state, how we are going to connect to the rest of the nation. And so that would be up to us to define.
My question, you mentioned, that the definitions may have been put out there at the last meeting or are still being circulated, where you're saying originally the legislation was intended to provide service to public safety generally, and then getting down to, well, who is that and what does that really mean? And that it also is now including homeland, provisions. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, where do you really draw the line? And does it end with police, or does it include transportation, or does it include critical infrastructure and providers, and what your opinion might be on that?
So you're asking for my opinion, which I'm always happy to give out. I think most of you have seen I'm outspoken on a few issues. So this is not representing FirstNet. This is representing Chris Burbank and my personal opinion of what works best for the state and, quite frankly, for the Salt Lake City Police Department. And so legislation was put out that had terms in it. And so now you have a bunch of attorneys at different levels trying to define exactly what those terms mean and what they will include. I have always been of the mindset, now this is all my opinion and not representing FirstNet, I have always been of the mindset, if we are going to build a broadband capable network, which originally was for Salt Lake City was my vision, I want that to be as all-inclusive as it possibly can be, with the few exceptions that I think there needs to be if we're saying this is a public safety network, if we're actually moving in the direction of replacing land mobile radios and some of those other things, then it needs to have those priorities or that capability in order to accomplish that. Because otherwise it's not going to be utilized for a law enforcement purpose or even, quite frankly, for a broader public safety purpose. So I would certainly like to see a network that's capable of putting all that we can on it throughout the state. And that's where my expertise ends, and you'd have to talk to somebody who knows much better than I do as far as the volume that system could handle, especially in the event of, say, we had an earthquake in Salt Lake City or even a mall shooting or anything else. What is the capability of a system that we can ensure? And that's part of what needs to be defined now from a national perspective is there is a big difference, although every system is limited, but there is a difference between somebody paying to make a phone call and a law enforcement officer who needs to access a network at a certain time. And so we just need to define what that is. But I would certainly like to see a very broad, inclusive, that everybody has the capability to participate on, as long as we can accomplish that preemption or priority over here on the other side that's going to enable us to take care of business if we need to.
And Chief Burbank, you anticipate this will be a public partnership going forward?
You have this much spectrum that's been set aside. Does it have the capability to do what we want it to do? And I've been assured that yes, many times over, that it has that capability. The limitation becomes in locations, right, to develop that preemption or priority. But overall, there's certainly enough bandwidth.
Steve Burbank, one question I would have. I know Steve Proctor had reported to our group. He was part of the National Committee on Writing the Interoperability Standards. I'm wondering how you feel that effort's going, and then will UCAN take the lead for the state on developing FirstNet if we opt in?
So I believe that as far as the interoperability capability, I mean, that's exactly what's taking place right now, and I'm very encouraged in the direction that we're going. I don't know necessarily that UCAN is the option for this network or not. I mean, that is up to the governor and our state to decide this is how we're going to develop and who's going to represent the state at this level in order to develop the network within the state. So please, ask away.
Anything,
Cal-
if we look back in the history of man, and that is communication is the first thing, even before education. Any country that has developed communication has grown to be a great nation. We need to lead in communication, and we are, but we need to continue. So areas like this are crucial. And I think that communication in any emergencies is key also. So I'm sure we as a group just are thrilled with anything with communications. And where something in the southern part of the state, the northern part of the state, we communicate like you said, earthquakes, things of that sort. And I can tell you out there, a lot of the old ham radio people, they're interconnected big time, and it's huge that we have that, because if we do not have power, that will be our communications.
You're absolutely right. And interesting, as you look at the states that have already had the consultations done with FirstNet, a lot of what has been the discussion is, okay, we had this event, right, and it's been, you know, in Salt Lake City, mall shootings, it's been school I mean, it's been these large-scale emergencies or disasters in which we've lost. 9/11 has been huge discussion about lost the capability that we cannot afford to have on a network that we're saying is dedicated for public safety for that type of communication. And so that the challenge is truly building a hardened network that is going to be survivable under just about any condition and have the capacity on demand when needed. And so that, again, certainly falls outside my area of expertise. I'm just there to say, this is what I want. Now, those of you who have a lot more education in this area, please make sure that the network has that capability. So I am encouraged that it is moving in the right direction. And certainly not touting my own horn, I was very pleased to be able to serve on this board and represent the state and to see how far we've come. I've worked on this nationally for several years with the major city chiefs, they were very instrumental. It's a group of the largest 70 cities in the U.S. and Canada, and we've worked on securing the D block. In fact, we had several chiefs that did nothing for years and years but work in this area because it is very important to public safety throughout the nation. And so I am encouraged that there are some positive steps going forward. I was very pleased, again, that RFIs are being issued, and so we had a little lag time there. And I think we're starting to head in the right direction, and pleased, again, that the state is really leading out and prepared to say, okay, we're up, we're ready, let's see how we can connect to this, and hopefully be one of the first to start down the road on this project.
Kelly, this is Sabrina on the bridge. There's been someone's been trying to ask a question a couple of times. I don't know if they're still on.
Sabrina, you need to talk a little bit louder. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Someone on the bridge has tried to ask a question of the chief a couple of times, and if he's still on, I would hope he injects his question now.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the chief could address the public-private partnership focus that the board and committees had discussed last week.
With Eric Eisens of CenturyLink.
Oh,
thanks, Kelly.
Absolutely. I think what you've seen develop over the last year or so is the fact that I don't believe there's any board member that thinks that this is going to be a standalone network. And so it is going to require some sort of public-private partnership in the future in order to accomplish this. I mean, this is a huge task. And so I'm very encouraged by the participation that's been taking place. I think as far as from the private sector, they have felt a little in the dark but we're starting to see a little more participation because there's some avenues for participation. I mean, until a few months ago, it was strictly let's have conversations on the side, and now you actually have some official avenues that people can participate and say, this is what we can accomplish, or this is what we're proposing. One of the challenges that exists certainly for private enterprise is the fact that you are sharing your potential lifeblood publicly, and what your plan may be and how you want to connect. And so that the need to keep that information secure while still having an open and transparent process from a federal government perspective is a little bit of a challenge. But I don't think there is anybody, especially not on the board, who believes this is going to be a standalone network that will just exclude the private